Shontel Atkinson is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and a member of the Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council, with over 8 years of experience in the immigration field. She is also founder of Atkinson Immigration Services, a boutique immigration firm located in Ontario, Canada. She graduated from the University of Toronto with an honors degree in international development and political science, and later graduated top of her class with honors after completing the Immigration Practitioner Program at the Academy of Learning Career College. At present, Shontel is an adjunct professor at the prestigious Queen's University in Ontario, where she instructs key modules of the graduate's diploma in immigration and citizenship law. She is also a CPD presenter and speaks on several immigration topics to professional and public audiences. Shontel is a proud recipient of the Barbados Canada Association 2021 Barbados Independence Award for a significant contribution to the Barbadian diaspora in Canada. Of course, you will remember Shontel from last year, 2021, when she also presented at our annual Pathways to Canadian Immigration Lecture. And we are delighted to have her back once again to present on the topic, Pathways to Understanding the Canadian Work Permit System. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Shontel Atkinson for this year's Pathway to Understanding the Canadian Work Permit System lecture. Shontel?
Thank you so much, Council. Good evening, everyone. So it's a pleasure for me to speak to you today once again, and I'm hoping that the information that is shared today could be very useful, and of course that we come tomorrow to get the second part of the information. So I want to thank the opportunity I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to you all today, and yeah, I'm hoping that we have a great time. So today we'll be talking about understanding the Canadian work permit system. And here we have our disclaimer. So this information that is presented today is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute any kind of professional advice on behalf of myself or on behalf of the consulate. So today we'll be focusing on we'll be having an introduction to the Canadian labor market. We'll be looking at the different types of work permits that you can get in Canada. We'll be looking at work authorization for international students, persons that have studied in Canada and then have, completed their studies, family members accompanying persons in Canada, wanting to, reunite with their family members in Canada, minor children, and we'll be looking at work permits for persons that they're basically undergoing the permanent residence process in Canada. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Now, today is basically about, work permits for persons inside Canada. The goal is always to get, persons inside Canada to apply for these work permits from in Canada. And tomorrow we'll be focusing at how you would approach and apply for work permits from outside Canada. So tomorrow is a continuation of today's discussion. So first, what I have here is the map of Canada. As we know, Canada is, in terms of the geographical layout of Canada, we have a very big country. Canada has, like a total of 10 provinces and 3 territories, and their work permit opportunities in each of these territories and each of these provinces. A lot of persons know about, particular provinces like Ontario. A lot of people know about Alberta, they know about Vancouver, they will know about Montreal, which is in Quebec. But rest assured that there are opportunities all over Canada, and sometimes persons find it better when they venture out in less populated areas in terms of having work opportunities. So that's one thing that we have to keep in mind in terms of being able to be flexible and open-minded about where in Canada you could settle in the West, you could settle more mid-Canada, or you could settle in the East. Most places have opportunities for workers. Now, why you would want to work in Canada, like white individuals would want to work in Canada. Like, firstly, there are a lot of, I know that many people would see a lot of, different flyers going around. They see a lot of programs, with persons like Canada needing workers, et cetera, et cetera. The thing about working in Canada is that Canada has a relatively low employment rate compared to other developed countries like the UK or like the US. So we do have what I would say, we do have a need for workers in Canada, especially in remote areas in Canada. And a lot of our temporary workers that come from abroad, they bring a lot of essential skills to the Canadian businesses in Canada. So they are looking for a lot of workers, but the key is to come to Canada under the right programs and come to Canada through those pockets of opportunities that are actually available to us. So Canada is also ranked really high in modern technologies, and we have an advanced economy and an advanced. We have a lot of technological advances where persons that are in these fields can actually have really good careers in Canada. So another thing is that immediate family members and their spouses and their children are always encouraged, to move to Canada with their family members when they're working, in Canada. So children can study while the parents work, and sometimes their spouses can also work, can work while, that individual is studying or working in Canada. So Canada is a very diverse, and we see the diversity in a lot of the metropolitan cities, but we also see it, we see it all over Canada, where there are many businesses that are really open, and they push, to hire, persons in underrepresented groups, and hire persons, from a variety of diverse backgrounds. So in Canada, we always promote diversity. So that could be one of the reasons why, working in Canada could expose you to different types of opportunities and experiences. And obviously, Canada is ranked as one of the best countries in the world in terms of having a good place to seek opportunities and also to raise a family. So a lot of people move here because it's safe, is fairly predictable, and the society is structured in a very neat way where people can just conduct their lives normally. Now, in terms of the Canadian labor market, and I know that many of you are probably anxious about how the labor market works and the different types of work permits that we have in the labor market. So our labor market in Canada is focused on two primary programs. We have the first program, which is called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is, I would say, is a common program, and this is the most common program that we will be looking at. But we're going to more focus on this program tomorrow, because this program is more for persons that are applying for work permits from outside Canada. And then we have what we call the International Mobility Program. So the Temporary Foreign Worker Program is all about labor shortages, and is all about having those temporary workers come to Canada and fill those labor shortages that you would often see advertised, right? You would often see these shortages advertised, like Canada needs workers. You will see a lot of opportunities with respect to, persons, opportunities in Canada for these temporary workers. But you have to be careful, because there are a lot of different types of opportunities that are painted as legitimate opportunities, but you have to be, very tedious in your research when you're looking into employment opportunities. So we'll discuss a lot about that tomorrow. And then we have our International Mobility Program, as I said, which is based on significant benefits. So it's mostly based on a lot of international agreements that Canada would have with other countries, and basically allowing workers to come to Canada. I wouldn't say easier, but sometimes is not based on a labor shortage. It's based on somebody having a significant benefit to contribute to Canada. So for example, cultural workers, persons that, own businesses and they're trying to set up businesses in Canada under international programs and so on. So we have two different types of work permits that you would hear about. We have open work permits and we have employer specific work permits. So the most common type of work permits in our labor market system are employer specific work permits. Anytime you hear employer specific, it means that the employer has to be involved. And those are the type of work permits that we'll be exploring tomorrow, especially. But the employer specific work permits require the direct involvement of an employer who's going to offer you a job in order to work in Canada. The concept of an open work permit is a little different. An open work permit allows you to work for any employer in Canada, except for employers that are blacklisted or employers that are offering some type of business opportunities that persons don't necessarily approve of, like striptease, erotic dances, escort services. All these types of employment are prohibited. So with respect to open work permits, the open work permit allows you to work for any employer in most geographical locations in Canada, whereas the employer-specific work permit, as I would have said before, it allows you to work for a specific employer according to the conditions on that particular work permit. So your work permit will be tied to the employer, and if you want to change, your job or you want to work for other employers, you would have to obtain another work permit with the new employer on that work permit. So employer-specific work permits, first thing, are the most common type of work permits when persons are looking to come to Canada to work from foreign. Now, open work permits, gets us a little excited. We have two types of open work permits. We have open work permits that could be completely unrestricted, which means that they would allow individuals to work for any employer in Canada in any province. And then we have some open work permits that could also be restricted. So they're open, but they're restricted by an occupation or location. So if I just explain, in terms of a restricted occupation specific work permit, you'll be restricted to a specific occupation. So say if you have a open work permit that is a caregiver open work permit, it would mean that you would be limited to working in that occupation as a caregiver, but you could work for any employer. And then sometimes we have work permits that are location specific, meaning that they're completely open, but they're tied to a particular province or geographical area in Canada. So it would mean that, like, for instance, if you have a location specific work permit that is basically for Ontario or is basically for Alberta, you could only work in Ontario or you could only work in Alberta. And moving outside of that geographical location that they have instructed you to work in would be a violation. So open work permits are an interesting way to, get the required work experience that persons would need for permanent residence, but sometimes, they can be restricted. Now, who can apply for an open work permit? And our seminar today is geared towards, persons that are already in Canada that would more than likely have open work permits and, have the advantage of applying for open work permits. So one of the most popular open work permits that you can get would be, like what we call the post-graduation work permit. So Canada has a huge international student program, which we're going to talk about in a few. So the international student program is a very popular program. And for most international students that come to Canada, after they have studied in Canada, they're given the opportunity to apply for a post-graduation work permit. Now, this opportunity is uncontested in the sense that it is according to public policy. So it's not challenged. So as long as you are an international student in Canada and you're eligible for that post-graduation work permit in the sense that you basically follow the criteria for getting this permit, they will grant this permit to you. And the type of permit that you get as a student that have studied in Canada would be an open work permit. So it means that students that have studied in Canada, they're free to move to different provinces and they're free to work, is completely open and unrestricted. So we also have other types of open work permits. like destitute students. This one is popular. So a lot of persons come to Canada, especially during the COVID time. A lot of students, could no longer support their studies because, they lost their support from home. We have a lot of things going on in the world right now. And in the event that a student's form of support is disrupted, and for certain reasons beyond their control, as long as they can prove that to immigration, they can apply for an open work permit that is unrestricted. It allows them to work in Canada for a stipulated period of time until they save, the amount of money to return to school. And the idea is that eventually they'll be able to return to school. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, when persons move to Canada, sometimes there are some issues that are outside the scope of immigration. So sometimes they might work for an employer that may be taking advantage of them, etc. I want us to know that there are provisions in the law for these type situations. So where there are situations where persons are abused, or they weren't treated fairly by the employers who are trying to take advantage of them, in that context, those persons could apply for open work permits as well. They can actually take advantage of the public policy and apply for those open work permits. Now, persons that are permanent residents in Canada, now obviously if a person, in Canada, we separate the two when we talk about temporary residents, like persons coming to Canada temporarily, like visitors, students, workers, we separate those from persons that have a permanent intention that want to apply for permanent residence. So if you're applying for permanent residence, they usually encourage you to stay. So according to the public policy, again, persons that are applying for permanent residence can, apply for open work permits to stay in Canada while their permanent residence is processing. And also their family members. Okay, so the family members are always encouraged. We have to remember that Canada values families. So it's never a question as to if your spouses can join you, if your children can join you, because they always want families to stick together. So they do have the opportunity for your spouses and your common law partners to also join you. If you're studying in Canada or if you're working in Canada, they can always join you. And other persons that could get open work permits would be like refugee claimants and protected persons that came to Canada and they're fleeing some kind of persecution or fear of their life. And those persons, when they have made what we call that a refugee claim, they are also entitled to open work permit while their case is going before the immigration authorities to see if they legitimately need that protection. And we have persons that might be in certain situations where what we will call in Canada is that they're inadmissible, meaning that they were ineligible and they had to do a more complex process, which is called a temporary resident permit. Those persons can also have a work permit as well. And young people that are involved in international programs. Now, the international programs is written here is very ambiguous, but the international programs are usually with countries that have a special agreement with Canada. So we have a lot of European countries that have a special agreement with Canada where they have the young people exchange, and Canadians would go to Europe to work, and Europeans would also come to Canada to work. Those individuals are also able to get an open work permit. So a lot of people sometimes, from Barbados would have like dual citizenship, and they would be rooted in European countries. They also have the opportunity to apply for open work permit as well. Now, study work in Canada is my focal point. So the benefits of studying in Canada. Studying in Canada is a great opportunity to get your foot into the door in the Canadian work system. I'm always, talking to clients, in Canada and abroad, and everyone is wondering, how to get into Canada and how best to get a work permit in Canada. Like ultimately, everybody's interested in working in Canada, but my focal point is always studying in Canada because we have great educational programs in Canada, and apart from the actual education aspect, we also have, studying in Canada can prepare a student for that integration into the Canadian job market. So students can work, part-time while they're studying, and that is one of the lucrative attractions with respect to having a study permit in Canada. and being able to work while you study. So that is a great opportunity. So a lot of post-secondary programs that you would do in Canada would ultimately lead for that open work permit, that open post-graduation work permit after you study. And international students are able to transition to permanent residence after gaining professional work experience. So, for me, a lot of persons are usually wondering about work permits, and I could understand, persons wanting to be anxious about working in Canada, but it in terms of the Canadian society and how they look at it in the Canadian economy and immigration, studying in Canada, they see it as a reciprocal benefit in that you're gaining education. You could also study, and then on top of that, they give you the opportunity to apply for permanent residence. So one of the main drawbacks about studying in Canada is that it's expensive, but there are some benefits despite the cost in terms of actually studying in Canada. Now, choosing a program and a school in Canada is very important when you're considering studying in Canada. And this is one of the best ways, I would say, to get a work permit in Canada. Because while you're a student, you can, as I said before, you can work while you're studying. And after you have graduated, it is uncontested in the public policy that they will grant you that post-graduation work permit as long as you're eligible. Now, when you are applying, and we're going to discuss about this a little bit tomorrow, but when you're applying for a regular work permit, which is an employer-specific work permit, you always need the cooperation of the employer. So you would always need the employer to, kind of petition the government, or you would always need that involvement of the employer. So they would have to offer you a job. They would have to do, half of the paperwork or most of the paperwork in order for you to come to Canada. But when you are looking to study in Canada, even as a mature student who has already gotten their bachelor's degree or their master's degree, there are tons of different programs in Canada that you could study at colleges, universities. Sometimes they're not, you don't have to do a master's, you wouldn't have to necessarily do a bachelor's. You have post-grad programs, you have different types of diplomas and certificates that are very different from, programs that you will see across the world. And, a lot of them are skills based. So you get a theoretical blend along with that work experience, internships and co-ops and so on. And one of the reasons why I would say studying is, like a really good thing in terms of getting your foot into the door is because it is all up to you, right? It's all up to the individual in a sense that you're able to go at your own pace. You're able to, it depends on your finances, it depends on you choosing your school, choosing the appropriate school, choosing how long you want to study. It is all based on the individual. The individual is in control in the sense that all they need is to find a program, they need to apply for their study permit, and then they basically are able to get themselves together, come to Canada and study. When you are applying for a work permit, and is an employer specific work permit especially, you're limited, as I said, by the employer's involvement. So if they change their mind, that could affect the process. If the laws change or the rules change, that could affect the process. And we have seen Canada over the years being overly generous with international students. And what we have learned within the last 2 years in this COVID pandemic is that when the going gets rough, Canada looks to pick from inside. So a lot of persons that were, kind of facilitating the process from outside Canada during COVID were at a disadvantage because with all the travel restrictions and accessibility issues, Canada was pulling from inside. So there were a lot of international students in Canada, that wouldn't even normally be, eligible for permanent residence as yet, but they were given the opportunity to apply for permanent residence because they're in Canada already. So they're seen as being in the labor market already. So international students, one of the things that you have to look for if you're interested in studying in Canada is choosing a school that is designated. So we call the schools in Canada that international students can go to designated learning institutions. And you can choose from colleges, university. We have private colleges, we have vocational and technical schools. We have different types of schools with different types of rules. And then with respect to your children coming to Canada, all primary and secondary schools in Canada enroll international students, and they're able to come. So the system with respect to students is very, very welcoming. Now, in terms of the designated learning institution, like I said before, you would need, if you want to get a study permit as an international student, you have to go to a designated learning institution. But choosing your school in Canada when you're thinking long term for your permanent resident opportunities, or you're thinking about working in Canada, the type of school that you go to matters. So we promote public institutions, which are usually automatically, it renders people automatically eligible for the post-graduation work permit after you study. We have a lot of private colleges around that are also designated learning institutions, but it could be a difference with respect to getting that post-graduation work permit after you have studied. So you should always consider DLIs, which are designated learning institutions that are eligible for the granting of the post-graduation work permit. So for me, it's pretty simple in terms of, navigating it, in the sense that most public institutions in Canada are eligible for the post-graduation work permit, and most private colleges are not. So the thing about private colleges and public post-secondary schools is that when an individual go to a public school, they're able to get that post-graduation work permit, and their spouses are able to study in Canada, are able to work in Canada while they're studying. But when you go to a private college, sometimes what happens is that even though you can work part-time, you wouldn't be able to get the post-graduation work permit after you study. And sometimes it affects the status of the spouse, the accompanying spouse, if they want to work in Canada while their partner is studying. So when we're choosing schools in Canada, the types of schools we want to consider mostly are public schools, and we want to consider programs that are for at least 8 months or longer. So if you study a program that is less than 8 months, you're not eligible for that work permit. Unfortunately, you could only be eligible for that work permit if your program within itself is 8 months or longer. Now, I have some schools here in Ontario that are public post-secondary schools. Usually, if you just do a quick Google search and you put in public post-secondary schools, a lot of schools will come up. And even if you're doing your research, and when you go on the websites for the schools, you will see that they're public. So you would never talk to a consultant or a lawyer in Canada, and they would advise you to go to a private college, knowing that you're not going to be eligible for the post-graduation work permit after, because we always think in the long term. Like, a lot of people just think about studying or working temporarily, but after, when those opportunities are exhausted and they want to move on to the next step in terms of getting permanent residence, they want to have the best opportunities. And in order to inline these opportunities, you may want to go to a public post-secondary institution. So here we have some popular post-secondary institutions in Ontario. And we have some universities as well. So universities can have they can have like bachelor's programs, master's programs, or you can have a lot of postgraduate programs that enable persons to be able to build on what undergraduate studies they have before. So like I said, you don't always have to do a bachelor's, you don't always have to do a master's. And as I said, one of the drawbacks about studying, is the cost. But in Canada, you're able to, the cost is able to benefit you in a sense that, you get more opportunities for PR, which is permanent residence. You get more opportunities for permanent residence for yourself and your family members. And you find that money that you would have paid in tuition, it kind of benefits you, to open those doors. If you were to go to a private college, even though it might be significantly cheaper, what would happen is that you will not have those same type opportunities. So in terms of choosing your public schools and the institutions in Canada, I just have some tips here. It is always best to choose your schools properly, because, like I said, studying at public post-secondary schools present the most opportunities. You will be able to apply for that post-graduation work permit, and your spouse is also able to get a work permit. So in Canada, like when clients are thinking about coming to Canada and they're thinking about studying, is usually a joint family venture, in the sense that one spouse would usually study, and that would enable the other spouse to get permanent resident, to get an open work permit, or vice versa. So they could choose between two, who wants to do the studying, who wants to do the working. And ultimately, like the spouse that is doing the working in Canada, they can actually sometimes qualify for permanent residence after just, working for 1 year or working for 2 years. So depending. So it works. It is, everything in immigration is planned and is forward looking, in the sense that if you have like a couple in a family unit that have decided to move to Canada, and one spouse has decided to study and the other spouse has decided to work, if the spouse that is working in Canada has, like a wealth of education already and work experience, they can qualify for permanent residence a little faster. So sometimes they may not even have to wait for the spouse that is studying in order to work and then apply for PR. There are many people that could apply for PR faster. And when I say PR, I mean permanent residence. So choosing your school is really important in terms of having a public school, because you find that sometimes you can have a higher quality of education at the public schools, where they could lead to easier integration into the job market. So when we're looking at the private colleges, they're not monitored as closely as the public institutions, in the sense that the ministry is able to monitor the public institutions a lot like closer. So at the private colleges, sometimes anything goes. So the quality of education could be a little lower. And as I said before, although public post-secondary institutions are costly, they tend to be, the benefits are a little bit more rewarding. So for persons that are just primarily interested in working in Canada, just don't turn a blind eye to the studying opportunity. You could still feel free to look for schools, still feel free to explore that as an option, because from my experience, especially with everything happening now in the world, studying is the best way to get into Canada right now, as of now. Now, when you're studying in Canada, while you're conducting your study, your program, while you're a student in Canada and you're studying, we have certain benefits and advantages that allows you to, be able to work inside Canada while you are a student. So that is another thing that is really interested when people are thinking about balancing, the costs, and when they're also thinking about supporting their families and their livelihoods while they're in Canada. So a study permit that you get when you're coming to Canada to study would have conditions that you could work on campus or off campus. And usually when you're a student and you have such a study permit, you don't require a separate work permit unless you're doing a co-op program. So if you're doing a co-op program, which we will call, another word for co-op is internship. So if your program comes with a job opportunity where you have to complete a certain amount of work hours, that would count towards your degree or your certificate or your diploma, you would need a separate work permit. But if you are a regular student, your study permit has the conditions that you could work on or off campus, you wouldn't need a separate work permit. So you'll be able to work without a physical work permit. And all the employers in Canada knows that students can work in Canada without a work permit. So it doesn't mean that anybody could come to Canada and work. It just means that the students that are studying, that have that study authorization, is kind of like a dual authorization, in that it also gives them the opportunity to work, and the employers know this. So students can start working in Canada when their study program has started. So you usually can't work before your study program has started. So the thing about studying in Canada is that your ability to work is tied to your studying. So anytime that you're no longer a student or you're no longer enrolled in school, it affects your ability to work. So that is paramount. So once you're a student, you have to actually start your studying and be enrolled in that institution in order to take the advantage of working. And you must be a full-time student at these institutions. So part-time students, not so much. I think for some study permits, you can get part-time, but that is one of the conditions where sometimes you're not able to work. So in order to fully engage and be able to work as a student and integrate into the work into the Canadian labor market on that level, you would need to be a full-time student at one of those institutions, and you would need to be enrolled. So you would have to show, you would have to continuously show that you are enrolled in school. So a student that is no longer enrolled in school, but they're working are directly in violation. So that could cause a problem with their remaining in Canada. And if they leave Canada, it could be a problem for them coming back to Canada. So, so one of the two things that we have to remember is that you have to maintain that full-time student status and you have to be currently enrolled in school. Now, in terms of the study program, students when they're looking to work in Canada as a student, their study program would have to be at least 6 months long, and it would have to lead to a degree, a diploma, or certificate. So there's some people sometimes that can work in Canada, that can study in Canada without a study permit. Um, because the rules and the statutes and the laws allows them to study in Canada. And we're talking about, like, for example, minors, and we're going to talk about them a little later in this seminar. And sometimes, like, diplomats and their children and family members are not, they don't have to get a study permit or work permit. But for the average person, if in order to study and work, your program has to be 6 months or longer. If your program is less than 6 months, you don't even need a study permit. So if you work, you would be in violation. So your study program has to be more than 6 months, and it has to be leading to a degree, a diploma, or certificate. So there's some programs that basically, they don't lead to anything. They could just be a program that you undertake. But in order to actually take advantage of working and being an international student, the program must explicitly lead to a degree, diploma, and a certificate. So you could also work in Canada, as I said before, if you started studying already, and you would have to get a SIN. So remember, I said that the employers in Canada and the government automatically know the laws are so consistent that international students, can work in Canada while they're studying. So your study permit allows you to get a social insurance number. And that social insurance number would be, like, I think in Barbados it's called like a registration number. You need to have that number in order to work legally. So for students, they can always obtain this number from the government of Canada, which allows employers to basically, be able to pay them. The employers are able to register them and look into the system to see that they're, legally able to work. So employers are also responsible for making sure that that their study permits are valid, and they're actually really legitimately able to study. Some employers are not tedious, some are not. They're not that thorough. So it's up to the individual. Responsibility is up to the individual in terms of maintaining your own responsibility and for your own good to make sure that your study permit is valid, to make sure that you can study and you can work. Now, when students are looking to work in Canada, they can work for up to 20 hours per week while they're in their regular academic session. So in our regular academic sessions are when school is in session. So while the semester is going, while you're actively going to classes, you can work for up to 20 hours per week. Any more than 20 hours is a violation and could cause major problems with immigration. So it always must be 20 hours or less. Now, when students are on break, so when they are on summer breaks, winter breaks, like how we would have Christmas break, how we would have breaks for the summer. Some students are off for 2 months, sometimes 4 months. During that time, they could work full time. So some students and a lot of people that have moved their families to Canada, sometimes they don't even return for the breaks. They would just use that time to work as much as they could, and they'll be able to work full time. So sometimes for international students, there's no rush for heading back home right away. It's not like they have to leave. They could enjoy their summers. They could work full time. They could really integrate into that labor market and see what jobs are available to them, what they like doing, where they would like to work. They basically have so many different opportunities. No, at this time I'll just ask Consul General, are there any questions at this time? Yeah.
Actually, no, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but okay, I'm seeing somebody saying yes. Is there a question? I'll give you all a couple minutes. I'll give you 2 minutes. Somebody start typing questions. I'm seeing something here saying, I have a 2-year-old. I wanted to know if she would need a permit to attend school.
Okay, so we'll get to that a little later in the presentation. So if that is the only question, we could hold that because we will be talking about minors soon. Well, we will be talking about minors today.
Okay, and somebody's asking how challenging it is to acquire a study permit.
Okay, I don't think it's challenging at all. It depends on your educational background, obviously. So getting a study permit is largely dependent on what you're going to study. So I would say that the hardest part about getting a study permit would be applying for the schools. Once you're a person that is well educated, like if you have some education before, like especially if you have like your CXCs and up, I will say getting into colleges and universities wouldn't be that difficult. And then the next challenge would be the funding in terms of showing that you're able to pay for at least the first year of your studies. So you wouldn't have to show the government that you're going to be paying for all of your studies at once, but they would want to see that you can at least cover the first year of your studies for yourself and also any additional family members that are coming to Canada. So I would say that is really not that difficult. It depends on the individual and what program they're interested in. So it goes into a lot of complexities, but I will say that is not that difficult. And Canada has millions of international students every year. So it's really, really not that difficult. And Barbados is not one of those countries that are red flagged in the government, meaning that a lot of Barbadian students that come to Canada, like it's known that a lot of Barbadian students want to come to Canada to study. So we're not one of those countries that, the government would be overly suspicious and concerned about fraudulent documentation. A lot of persons, once they have the funding to go to Canada and they actually have gotten into the school, they have applied to the school, which is a separate process, then they're pretty much good to go.
Okay, Shontel, I'm seeing somebody asking at what point can I apply for a SIN number?
Once they have their study permit. Once they have the study permit, yeah.
Okay, is there an age limit on applying for the work permit?
No, there's no age limit. So persons can apply. Obviously, a lot of persons apply once they have finished secondary school, looking into going into their tertiary part of their studies. And then we have a lot of mature students in Canada as well. So I would not say that there's a age limit. It varies from person to person.
Okay, but I guess maybe in that regard, you may want to tell them like nobody under 16, or would it be over, is it over 16? And
there's no limit. I mean,
Okay.
babies, like if you have a baby, like obviously they can't be in school, but as long as you're studying able person that is for school, there's no limit in terms of really young children, and in terms of mature students, there's really no limit. So some people could apply for study permits
Oh, no,
for
this is work permit, not study permit. Work
a
permit.
work permit.
Yeah.
Um, a work permit. In terms of the work permits, with minors it gets a little tricky because a minor is under the age of 18, but depending on the provinces, they have different rules with respect to the ages that some people can work. So I think some people could work legally and earn a wage. Like, I mean, in Canada they work young, right? So it depends it depends from province to province. So you will find like some people 16 years old working, but I think for persons that are coming from overseas, um, to have a 16-year-old apply for work permit and actually get it is really, really suspicious. They usually encourage persons to be like older, like 18 years, but you're not going to see it anywhere. Like in the public policies, is not going to say you know you need to be 18 years or older to apply. You're not going to see that. It varies from person to person.
Okay. I think you can take a couple more questions, or
Hold
you
those
want to,
questions and we'll continue.
sorry, one more?
Okay, one more.
One more. Okay, this person says, Jacqueline says, someone advised that employers are reluctant to give offers to foreigners as they have to prove that they are no citizens or residents for that role. Hence, they don't even bother to consider non-residents.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
So we'll be discussing about that tomorrow.
Okay.
I don't want to explicitly say that that's accurate, but I will say that Canadians and permanent residents have priority. So in employers offering a foreign worker a job, they have to show that there was nobody in Canada that they could hire, and they need to hire that person. So I would encourage that person to come tomorrow because their question will be answered in great detail.
Okay.
All right.
All right. I have other questions, but I'll hold them for your next session. Thank you. Continue. Yeah. All the questions that have been put in the chat, please, I will pose them to the presenter when she takes her next break. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so for international students, as I have been saying, post-secondary students are, you know, there's certain rules that they have to uphold. So we have to make sure, and these are like some takeaway tips. So if you don't remember anything, remember that, you know, persons cannot work unless they're enrolled, they're actively enrolled in their study program and they're studying full-time. They could only work as a part-time student if they are in their final semester. So the government is not cruel to think that everybody's constantly full-time. There are some circumstances where sometimes individuals have done their studies. Sometimes some people do summer terms, and in the very last semester of their studies, they may not need to have a full course load in order to finish. So in that case, international students could, you know, they could do one or two courses and be part-time students at that time. They don't need to have like a full course load. And individuals cannot work after they have completed their studies. So I can't stress this enough, in the sense that your study permit is tied to your working in Canada, is tied to your study permit, and tied to your authorization to study. And as long as you have completed your studies and you're done studying, you're no longer a student, you're not able to work unless you have applied, unless you have taken the next step, which would be to apply for the post-graduation work permit. So if you have applied for the post-graduation work permit, then you could continue on with your working. But if you haven't applied for that post-graduation work permit and you have completed your studies, you're not able to work. International students can work full-time when they apply for that post-graduation work permit. So while they're waiting on that decision from the government to come back to say, well, yes, you are open work permit holder, you're approved, they can work full-time up until they have received that decision. And if it's a positive decision, then they could continue working undisrupted. Now, students can apply to extend or restore their status if their study permit is expiring, or if they have lost their study permit, in terms of lost their student status by not applying for what we will call an extension of their study permit. But if you're gonna restore your status as a student, or you're gonna continue studying in Canada, you would need to make sure that you are studying, right? So if you are in between programs and you have completed a program, or you have come to the end of your study permit is expiring, and you need to do another program, you could extend you could extend your studies by applying for a new study permit and implementing the information of the institution that you're going to study at. But students also have that opportunity that they could, continue on. So if they have decided that they want to change programs, or they want to do something else after they have studied, they don't necessarily need to apply for the post-graduation work permit right away. They can decide to study for a longer duration. Now, the post-graduation work permits and working post-graduation. And ultimately, I think most international students, this is what drives them, it interests them. I remember years ago when I was an international student, I had no idea about the post-graduation work permit until I basically finished school. So this is a disadvantage. Sometimes we're not aware of the post-graduation work permit and that particular opportunity, which could make a huge difference in the type of school that you're studying or how long you want to study. So remember, I said that the post-graduation work permit is as per policy, and it's uncontested in the sense that, one, you want to meet the eligibility that the government has laid out for you, you are able to apply for this post-graduation work permit and actually be granted this post-graduation work permit. So once individuals have completed their studies, meaning that they have gotten their final marks from the university or the college that they have went to, so their final marks meaning the final confirmation of their mark on their transcript, or they have gotten confirmation from the school by way of letter saying congratulations, you have completed your program. You have from that exact date, you have 180 days to apply for your post-graduation work permit. So when we think about it, this is a really long time that they give you to figure out whether you want this post-graduation work permit or not. Now, the catch about the post-graduation work permit and persons that have decided to study, it could only be granted once in a lifetime. So you can't decide to do a study program in 2022 and study for 2 years, and then you decide to go back home and you want to chill, and then you spend 2 years there, and then you come back and you study again, and then you have to, this particular program is a one-time opportunity. So if they grant you the post-graduation work permit once, they're not going to grant it to you again. Okay, in order for you to get it again, you can't get it again. If you have studied, I usually advise persons to do all their studying that they want to do, and then get the post-graduation work permit. Or if you studied before, and then you're in that period where you have to apply for the post-graduation work permit, and that 180 days have passed, you're not able to get the post-graduation work permit. You can only get it if you study again, and then another 180 days would factor in after you have completed your studies. So it is important that persons, when they're actually going into study, that they really understand the rules about getting this post-graduation work permit. So you have 180 days after you have gotten your final marks to apply for this, what we call the PGWP, which is the post-graduation work permit. So you have, if persons are in Canada, they have to have valid temporary residence in Canada. So if they are a student, they should be applying with a valid study permit. And if they don't have a valid study permit at that time when they're applying, they should have valid temporary residence status in Canada, meaning that they would have changed their status to a visitor. For some people, their study permit is ending. They apply as a visitor. They apply for the post-graduation work permit while they have visitor status and waiting in Canada. And some people also have the opportunity to leave Canada. Okay, so if you're in Canada and your study permit has expired, and you don't have visitor status, you could always leave Canada and apply for the post-graduation work permit from outside Canada. But if you're inside Canada, you should have valid temporary resident status, which is one of the rules for applying for this post-graduation work permit. So for persons in Canada, the government can't give you any kind of temporary permit if you're out of status. So I think that is a discussion for another day. But out of status meaning that you're in Canada and your status has expired. Whether you're a visitor, you're a worker, you're a student, if you're out of status, the government does not grant you, they don't grant you a fresh work permit, study permit, or visitor record while you are out of status. You would have to be trying to reinstate or restore your status in order to get some type of documentation from the government, but they usually encourage persons to stay in status. So one of the main things about being in Canada and applying for this permit is to have your temporary resident status in check. Now you have to make sure that if you have left Canada, you're still applying within your 180 days, right? And you're not applying outside of that timeline, because that timeline is the timeline by policy. So what I find is that when persons try to apply outside of that 180 days, the officers, they don't have to give any kind of discretion. The rule says 180 days. So if you apply at 181 days, they can refuse it, and the law is on their side for refusing that permit. So you have to show that you have completed your study program. So you show by your transcripts or your completion letter from the program, and your program must have been 8 months long, and it must have led to a degree, a diploma, or certificate. What they're also going to be looking at for international students is that they have maintained full-time status as a student. So for the post-graduation work permit, sometimes, when persons are studying in Canada, they're like, oh, I don't need to apply for anything else. The government is not really checking, but for the post-graduation work permit, they are going to be checking that you maintain your full-time status as a student. And the only time that part-time is going to be considered is, if it was in your final semester. Now, obviously, because of COVID, a lot of people were part-time because classes were canceled. Persons had to leave the country. It was helter-skelter. So I find that with the post-graduation work permit processing as of lately, they have been a little lenient, but I don't think that is going to be for a long time. I think that we're normalizing. Everything is going back to normal. And I think that they're going to be back on their path in terms of tightening the restrictions a little bit more. So you must make sure that you have maintained full-time status as a student and that you're not inadmissible to Canada. So there's no criminality, you haven't lied on any applications previously or misrepresented any facts. They want to make sure that is what we call inadmissibility to Canada. If you have criminality, or if you have lied on application, or if you have misrepresented facts on application, all those things they're going to be looking at for this post-graduation work permit. Now, sometimes there's special cases with respect to the post-graduation work permit, where persons, sometimes are really smart and they're able to finish their programs within record time. So, for example, their program might be 1 year and they might finish the program within 1 year, 6 months, or the program might be, for 8 months and they might finish the program. The program might be for 1 year and they might finish it within 8 months. Or the program might be for, say, 2 years and they finish it within 1 year, 6 months. So this is what we call accelerated studies, or when they have accelerated their studies. In that case, those persons could, when they apply for the post-graduation work permit, the government is going to consider the length of time that the program is. So they're still going to give the post-graduation work permit for the length of time of the program. So if your program is 1 year, you were smart enough to finish it in 8 months, they would still give you that work permit that is equivalent to that 1 year that you have studied. Now, distance learning is very interesting. This comes under one of the special cases for the post-graduation work permit eligibility. And when I'm just looking at these dates, I'm kind of sorry that we didn't have this discussion in the middle of COVID, because it could have benefited a lot of people that are in Barbados. But they had special COVID policies with respect to the post-graduation work permits, and persons could have completed 100% of their studies online outside Canada between spring 2020 and August 31st, 2021. So COVID started in March 2020. Well, not started, but it hit us in March 2020. And from then until, August 2022, persons that have completed their studies outside Canada online are going to be eligible for this post-graduation work permit. So for persons that were lucky enough to do a 2-year program in that period, they would be able to get a post-graduation work permit to come to Canada in order to do their working in Canada after their studies. So in order to be eligible for, the distance learning and to be covered under this COVID policy, as we would call, you would need to be enrolled in a suitable in a suitable institution with respect to that is eligible for the post-graduation work permit. And you would be outside Canada because of COVID and you weren't able to travel, or you basically began you began in any semester from spring 2020 to summer 2022, or you're basically in a program that was in progress since 2020. So for international students that are on here with us today, if you were studying inside Canada and because of COVID you had to leave and finish your studies remote, your studies would still be counted towards that post-graduation work permit, even though they're outside Canada. And the reason why we call this a temporary COVID policy is because normally it doesn't work like this. Normally, in order to be eligible for the post-graduation work permit, your studying has to be present in Canada, right? And with respect to distant learning, only your studies, when you're present in Canada, permits you to have that post-graduation work permit. But COVID came, and it came with some, benefits with respect to persons outside Canada, and were able to apply for programs during that time. Now, in order to take advantage of this particular policy, you had to either have had a study permit or had an approval for a study permit. Like, so if you applied for a study permit from outside Canada and you were approved for that study permit, even that time that you were studying, can count. But while you had your approval, can count, towards the post-graduation work permit. So we see that they're extremely lenient with respect to these special cases surrounding that distance learning for the granting of the post-graduation work permits. Now, sometimes some people have to unfortunately take like what we call authorized leave from their studies. This is covered under the policy as well. So you basically, if you have taken an authorized leave from your studies, they could still grant you the post-graduation work permit. Usually the post-graduation work permit is for persons that have studied in Canada full-time and they have studied continuously. But there's some persons that unfortunately, because of some circumstances, they have to take a leave from their studies. And as long as they can show that their leave was authorized from their institution, so they got the permission of their institution for taking a leave, then they could apply for this post-graduation work permit. And some of these situations that would constitute taking a leave would be medical reasons for being like pregnancy, family emergencies, having a death in the family, or serious illness of a family member, or any other type of leave that your school authorizes. So it varies from school to school, institution to institution, with respect to who can have that authorized leave. So what might work at York University might not work at George Brown College, and vice versa. So you have to make sure to see what type of leave your school authorizes. Now, sometimes in Canada, over the last 5 years, I would say, a lot of institutions had talks about closing because of a strike. So sometimes if schools have closed permanently, or if they close because of a strike, this is considered. And, immigration usually turns a blind eye with respect to persons that were affected by a strike. So if you have changed schools, or if the school deferred your program, and we saw a lot of this during COVID, so sometimes some programs would need in-person interaction, or they would need lab work where you physically have to be in class. And, the schools had to defer the program start date. Those type situations are covered under the post-graduation work permit eligibility for special cases. So if any of these circumstances arise, the government is still able to grant that post-graduation work permit. Now, the duration of the post-graduation work permit, it matters how long you are able to apply for this post-graduation work permit. So even though it might be costly in Canada, like some people might say, you know, it will cost me better to do an 8-month program rather than to do a 2-year program or 1-year program. Now, with respect to the post-graduation work permits, persons could apply, applicants could work full-time. And sorry if I didn't mention before, but they could also be self-employed if they want to be self-employed in Canada. But I don't really talk about the self-employment because it becomes problematic when you're applying for permanent residence. For permanent residence, you would more than likely need to show that you have a job in Canada and you're working for a Canadian employer. Self-employment may not make them eligible if they're coming from inside Canada. Now, the length of time that you study matters because the most that you can be granted for the post-graduation work permit is 3 years. But the length of time that you're granted in order to work in Canada after graduation is directly dependent on the length of the program that you chose to study and you studied. So for programs, for example, that are between 8 months and 2 years, the length of the work permit will be the same as the program length. I've seen a lot of persons that did, you know, an 8-month program and they were still able to get a 1-year work permit from immigration. But that is when the officers are being generous. There's nothing in the laws that said that they have to grant a permit for 1 year. They can, within the laws, it says that if you're doing a program between 8 months and 2 years, your permit should be for the same length as your program. Your permit should be the same length as your program length. So if you get more time, that is really good for you. But if you get less time, there's no way to argue your way to say, well, you're deserving of more time. And this affects your future decisions because for permanent residents, everything is based on having at least 1 year of work experience. So you want to make sure that when you're studying in Canada and you're considering this post-graduation work permit pathway, that you're studying a program that is for, you know, at least a year, more than a year to be secured so that you can get that full length of time that you would need for permanent residence. So if you're doing a master's program that is between 16 and 23 months, you're going to get 3 years on that post-graduation work permit. And if you are doing a program that is going to be 2 years or longer, you're automatically going to get 3 years. So it's uncontested. As long as you go to a public institution, as long as you meet all the other eligibility, like applying within the 180 days, you were full-time, and you know you have all those things in a neat package, there's no issues with getting the post-graduation work permit. So this is why I would say that it is one of the best ways to get into Canada, because you know, as even during COVID, like, you know, persons that didn't have a work permit in Canada, you know, the government basically froze persons that were from outside, right? Only persons that were authorized to work in Canada were, you know, getting work in Canada and being able to work in Canada. And like I said, when you are a post-graduation work permit holder or you're a student, it's kind of like everything is, you know, you go at your own pace. Like everything is in your hands, in your control. So ultimately, I would always tell persons, you know, that studying in Canada is ultimately a good thing. Also, when you are applying for permanent residence, which, you know, this seminar does not cover permanent residence, but our seminar last year covered permanent residence in great detail. So for those of you who are interested in that, they could find our seminar on YouTube. Last year was really good. We talked about permanent residence. When you're applying for permanent residence in Canada, being a student has really good advantages. So sometimes for programs that have like some kind of selection criteria with points, you get points in Canada for working in Canada, you know, on the post-graduation work permit, and you also get points, you know, for studying in Canada. So ultimately, persons from inside Canada are always going to be more competitive than persons from persons inside Canada are always going to be more competitive than persons outside Canada. And that is just how the system is built on those particular preferences. Now, as I said before, you can apply for the post-graduation work permit either inside Canada or outside Canada. And working as a student when you have graduated helps with your integration into the Canadian labor market, both when you're a student and after you have completed your studies. And it opens opportunities for you to obtain permanent residence. Now, your work experience while you are a student will not directly count towards your permanent residence, but your work experience when you have applied for the post-graduation work permit and also while you have that post-graduation work permit does count towards your permanent residence. And when we're talking about work experience, we're talking about professional work experience, what we will call professional Canadian work experience. And our work experience is classified in terms of different skill levels. So for most permanent residence programs, they want high skills and they want high education. So for persons that are looking to directly apply for PR, or they're looking to study in Canada to get the postgrad to increase their competitiveness, there's the skill levels is something that, definitely is going to be integral in the process. So here we have the job level, these job skill levels in Canada, and our high skill levels are 0, A, and B. And these are levels, they go by the education that you would have or the experience that you have. So skill level 0 is more for managerial experience. Skill level A is more for persons that have experience and they have university education. And skill level B is considered experience that you would have gained through working in jobs that require college education or apprenticeship training. So for a lot of permanent resident programs, skill level C and skill level Ds are not really allowed. You would mostly see them in the provinces, but federally, and for most permanent resident programs, you're going to see skill level 0, A, and B being repetitive. And you're going to see that you basically need to have these skill levels in order to apply for permanent residence. Yeah. So I'll take some questions here before we get into the next part.
Okay. Questions. Let me go back a bit. Justin had asked a question. Justin wants to know if you are aware of any scholarships. I guess Justin is very interested in coming to Canada to study, but he wants to know, like I'm sure a lot of others, are there scholarships available? Do you know about that could help defray some of the cost?
Okay. I don't know about any scholarships, to be honest. And I usually like to discourage persons from scholarships because depending on the school that you go to and the scholarships that you go to, that you have at your disposal, sometimes they affect your post-graduation work permit eligibility. So how it works is that, especially if you're getting a scholarship that is directly from the Canadian government, a lot of persons that have gotten scholarships are excluded from applying for the post-graduation work permit. If you were to find a scholarship that is offered for a particular school that is for international students, you will have to speak to the school and make sure that there are no restrictions with respect to those scholarships and in terms of conflicting with your post-graduation work permit. So they want to make sure, I don't want to say they want to make sure that people pay their way in, but is kind of like a business in the sense that they want you to pay that tuition, right? So a lot, like when we look at different places like the UK, when we look at the USA, there are probably more scholarship opportunities than in Canada. They more want persons to pay their tuition. So I'm not familiar with a lot of scholarship opportunities.
Okay, thank you. And somebody else is asking, I'm not sure if I asked this one already. At what point can I apply for a SIN number after I have been approved for a study permit? I think you answered that before, right?
So having a study permit approval, if you have a study permit approval, usually study permit approvals are granted outside Canada, meaning that you get what we call a letter of introduction saying that you're approved for your study permit. And when you travel to Canada, you get your physical study permit at the port of entry or at the airport, as you will say, or if you're coming across the border by driving, you get the study permit at the land border. And once you get into Canada, you use your study permit to apply for your SIN, because your SIN is going to, in order for them to grant your SIN, they have to put the study permit information. So in short, you could only apply for study permit, you could only apply for SIN once you have gotten your study permit, not approved, not just the approval, but the actual permit.
Okay, and somebody else is asking, if a person has a master's already, what options are open to them? And I
PhD.
think paired with that would be somebody saying, okay, yeah, sorry, ask if you can answer that one. Mhm.
Okay, so PhD, yeah, it doesn't hurt to go higher. In Canada, they have a lot of direct streams of persons that are doing their PhD. So for example, if you're doing a PhD, like there are a lot of provincial programs that allow people to get permanent residence faster because they want them to stay in Canada. But if you have done your master's, ultimately some persons could do like post-grad diplomas. It depends. Like when people apply for study permits, and they already have like a wealth of education, what they're going to study in Canada has to be justified, in the sense that you could have a master's, but if you could supplement your application with enough proof and justification as to why you want to embark in studies in Canada, you know, they would more than likely be able to approve that application. So it's not encouraged to go down, it's encouraged to go up. But at the same time, for persons that have a master's, they could do another master's, or they could do what we call a post-grad diploma, or if they do something in their field that is able to give them specialized Canadian training in a particular area, that works as well. So sometimes you might have the theoretical knowledge from your studies from outside Canada, but in order to master the skills how they would want it on the Canadian labor market, you might need to do studies in Canada. So sometimes it doesn't have to be a master's. You could do like a post-grad diploma, or you could do a diploma as long as it's justified in the reasoning as to why you would want to do that program.
Okay, and somebody else is asking, postgraduate programs at an approved public university also qualifies you for the work permit, you said?
Pardon? Sorry?
They're asking if postgraduate programs at an approved public university also qualifies you for a work permit?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And okay, so this question I will leave. I will go to the next one, and the person asked, if accompanied by a spouse after my studies have finished and I am on a work permit before applying for PR, can my spouse continue to apply for work permits as well? Or is this based on my student visa?
All right.
So they're saying they're accompanied by a spouse, their studies have finished, but they're on a work permit and they want to apply for PR. But so can their spouse still legally continue to work or apply for another work permit as well? Or because the student visa has now ended and they're just on their work permit, does that allow the spouse to continue to work or to apply for a new work permit or no?
Okay, so I think that I'll answer that as we get into the accompanying dependents, because there's a direct answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So any other questions we could hold, and we could continue with our next part, which is the accompanying dependents. I think a lot of persons' questions will be answered here.
Yes. Okay. Thank
so
you.
much. Okay, so accompanying spouses of international students. So as we know, spouses could accompany you when you're studying in Canada and when you're working in Canada. Now, when we're talking about spouses, because I get a lot of questions about the definition of a spouse in immigration terms. Now, for immigration, in terms of your accompanying dependents that you're involved with, in relationships and so on, They recognize marriage and they recognize common law relationships. So marriage, meaning that you're legally married and you have a marriage certificate to support that. And being in a common law relationship, meaning that you have been living with a person for at least 1 year, so 1 year or more, and you can prove it, meaning that you have to sign a declaration of common law relationship, which is, as is in this, within the same standing as, giving an oath, that you are in a common law relationship, and being able to prove that you're in this common law relationship with this person. So you have to prove that you have been living with the person for at least 1 year. And this is where sometimes you have to be, I don't want to say creative, but they would want to see proof. Like they would want to see physical, like bills. They would want to see joint accounts. They would really want to see that the relationship has the same permanence as marriage, that you're living together for at least 1 year, and they're kind of united in a way. The only thing that is different is that they're not legally married. So they're looking for couples that have like those close ties. Now, it does not facilitate the form of boyfriend girlfriend type relationships that some people might be used to, are persons that are in long-term relationships but not living together. So if you're in a common law relationship with somebody that for 1 year, and you show that you have been residing with that person in that committal conjugal relationship for 1 year, would be recognized. And somebody that is in a boyfriend girlfriend type situation for 10 years, but they're not living together, they're not married, that would not be recognized. So sometimes it's about what you can prove in terms of this common law relationship and the marriage. So the first applicant, the person that is actually going forward for the study permit, is called the principal foreign national. So that is the main person that is going forward for this particular study permit. And the principal foreign national would have to be granted a study permit and holding that valid study permit as evidence for the dependent spouse to then get a work permit. Okay. And then especially if they're in Canada, they have to show that their spouse is in that particular program that is eligible for the post-graduation work permit. So ultimately, in order for your spouse to join you in Canada and work, you yourself would have to be entering into a program that is eligible for the post-graduation work permit. So it has to be a program at a public institution. Now, they also have to be actively pursuing their studies and full-time. So one thing that you would notice about applying for a work permit for a dependent spouse is that when you're applying, you have to show that the person was either approved for that study permit, meaning they have that approval letter, or it would have to be that the person is, right, they're either approved for the study permit by having that approval letter, or they actually have that physical study permit that they would get from the port of entry to supplement in that application to show that the first foreign national, who's the principal foreign national, is actually able to study in Canada. Now, in terms of the work permits work a little differently. The concept is the same in terms of being married or being in a common law relationship, but for the holders of a work permit, it doesn't depend, and I think this is relating to the question that was asked. For the spouses of the work permit, it doesn't depend on your work permit, on you having a work permit. It depends on the type of job that you have. So first of all, in order for your spouse to continue working as a spousal dependent, you would have to show that you are currently employed by an employer, okay, and that your job is in the professional skills that we would have talked about before in 0 A or B. So for spouses of international students, they get an open work permit. All that matters is that the principal spouse is studying. But for work permit holders, spouses of work permit holders, it depends on the job that they're doing. It depends on the job. So if you are, for example, and I'll just give you a quick example, if the person is studying in Canada and then they're transitioning to a post-graduation work permit, they would have to show that while they're waiting on their decision for the post-graduation work permit, that they're holding a job that is in a professional skill level 0A or B in order for their spouse to get a work permit or to continue working, if the spouse needs to get a work permit. If they're not working as yet, then the spouse is not going to be able to get the work permit. So the spousal work permit for workers is dependent on the job that you're doing. Now, in terms of minor children, and I think somebody had asked about minors. So a minor is somebody that is under the age of majority at the time they arrive in Canada. Those persons are considered to be minor children. So it varies from province to province. In Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Prince Edward Islands, Quebec, and Saskatchewan, the age of majority is 18. So meaning that every persons under 18 are minors. And then for British Columbia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia and the Northwestern Territories, Nunavut and Yukon, the age of majority is 19, right? So anybody under the age of 19 would be considered a minor. So minor children, the thing about minor children, we have minor children that are sometimes already in Canada, and then we have minor children that are coming with their parents from overseas. So first, we're going to look at the minor children that are already in Canada. So minors already in Canada, it's highly recommended that they apply for study permit in order to receive some social services from the provinces. So in Canada, or education, with respect to education, the type of schools you go to and so on, that the area of education is handled provincially. So it means that depending on the provinces that you go to, every province different provinces could have different rules with respect to the requirements of minors in school. So immigration is federal, meaning that it is all over Canada. So for immigration all over Canada, minors can accompany their parents, they could come to Canada. But in order for a minor to receive certain social services, like for example, if they need to get medical care that is attached like to their studying in Canada, they would need to have a study permit. So minors is a really interesting area because minors legally can study in Canada without a study permit if they're already in Canada. But because they would want to have access to these social services that the provinces will provide, it is highly recommended that we apply for study permits for them, even if they're already in Canada. So if they're in preschool, kindergarten, primary school, or secondary school, and the parent is a Canadian or permanent resident, sometimes they could study without a study permit. If they're children of refugee claimants, if they came to Canada as a visitor, if for a course or program of studies that is 6 months or less, they could study without a study permit. If they're going to be if they're in Canada by themselves, or they're on a visitor status by themselves, meaning with another family member or friends, but not with their parents on visitor status, they can study in Canada without a study permit. But it is recommended, as I said, that in order to get certain social services, it is recommended that they apply for that study permit. Now, sometimes if they have parents that is in Canada and the parents are studying, working in Canada, or sometimes if the parents are not physically in Canada, the minors can study in Canada without a study permit. But minors who don't have that study permit have to have what we call valid visitor status during their stay in Canada. So if a minor does not have a study permit, they have to still have that valid study permit. So the benefit of a minor having a study permit is that they could have the study permit for a prolonged time. But for a visitor, you could only be in Canada, you're legally in Canada 6 months at a time, meaning that you could only stay for 6 months, and beyond that, you would need to extend your stay. So for a minor, you would have to continuously keeping them in status by, applying for an extension of their status. Whereas if you apply for study permit, they can have that study permit, not valid. They could have that study permit for the duration of time that it is given, which is a prolonged time that would extend beyond a regular visitor status. So minor children of temporary residents who are visitors, and if the temporary resident is not authorized to work or study, the minors would automatically require a study permit to study in Canada. So if the simplest way is that if you are not working in Canada or not studying in Canada as a parent, you have to apply for that study permit for your child in Canada. And if you are a person that is working and studying in Canada, even though your minor can study in Canada without a study permit, provincially they might have some obstacles in terms of getting certain social services that other students in the schools are able to get and privy to. So that is one of the incentives to apply for study permit for these minors. Now, when we are looking at minor children coming into Canada, and if they're already in Canada, minor children would need a letter of acceptance if they're in Canada with a family member and the family member had a work or study permit approved before they entered Canada. Okay. Study permits for primary school students are issued for that period of 1 year, and their study permit can be renewed. And when we're looking at students that are in secondary school from grades 9 to 12, and in Quebec from grades 9 to 11, they can be issued a study permit for the length of the 4 years. Now, the benefit of applying, like if your child is in secondary school, the benefit of applying for that study permit for your child is that if your child is then transitioning into college or university and they still have time on that study permit, you wouldn't have to apply for a new study permit. You could just extend your study permit. But obviously, if the minor actually does not have a study permit and they only have their visitor status, then you have to apply for a study permit once that minor is then going to a higher level of education. Now, for minor children who are outside Canada, and they're intended to study in Canada, it is encouraged that they apply for that study permit before entering Canada. So the study permit exemption for minor children only applies if they're already in Canada. So the law says that if your minor is in Canada, they don't need to study. They don't need to study with us. They don't need a study permit in order to study. But if they need social services that is governed by the provinces, depending on the province, they may need to get a study permit. That law does not cover minors outside Canada. Okay. So even if you are applying for a study permit and you attempt to apply, for a visitor visa for your child, want to apply for any kind of temporary resident application for your child when you are applying for yourself, the minor child is looked at like a student. They're not going to consider them as a visitor. They will consider them as students. So in those circumstances, immigration will still grant the minor that study permit. So even when they are accompanying their parent who's authorized to work and study, as long as they're applying from outside, the immigration is within the public policy. They're going to look at that minor as a student. Now, minors who are coming to Canada with parents that have a valid study or work permit, they don't need to get a letter of acceptance from the school when applying for a study permit. So for an adult person that is applying for a study permit, you would need to apply for the school first. Once you apply for the school, you get your letter of acceptance and then you apply for your study permit. It doesn't work like this for minors. For minors, they could, once the parent is coming to Canada with a study permit or work permit and they're approved, they don't need a letter of acceptance from the school when they're applying. The parents could just apply for their temporary residence. The parents could just apply for their study permit. Now, the next category of persons who could apply for work permits in Canada are persons whose permanent resident applications are processing. So in short, there are different types of permanent residence categories in Canada. Like for example, if you're inside Canada and you have submitted an application for spousal under the spouse or common law partner in Canada class, you could apply for a open work permit to work while your permanent resident application is processing. And then if you, for example, part of the caregiver class and you have applied for permanent residence, you could again get an open work permit while your application is processing. If you are a refugee claimant or a person that has been given protection, meaning that you have gone through the process with the government and they have said that, yes, Canada agrees to protect you, at that point you could apply for open work permit. And if you are a person that is in a precarious situation, like you have applied for humanitarian and compassionate considerations because you're either ineligible for any immigration program inside Canada or you're inadmissible. Sometimes the appropriate recourse for those type situations are what we will call a humanitarian and compassionate applications. So for those persons that have received a first stage approval from those type applications could apply for an open work permit as well. And then persons that are coming under the economic streams that are inside Canada already and they're applying for like express entry or the provinces, if they show proof to the immigration that they have submitted their application and immigration has received their application, then they could apply for an open work permit to work while the application is being processed. Now, in terms of working in Canada, there's some people that don't need a work permit to work in Canada. And here's a list of persons, for example, like performing artists, public speakers, religious leaders. Sometimes these persons, if we examine this list a bit, we will see that according to this list, these persons are not directly involved in the labor market, like they're not competing with Canadians or permanent residents for jobs. They're doing specific purposes, they're carrying out specific actions, and they're in occupations that are of more benefit in Canada. So that is how you would know persons that are work permit exempt. And when we're looking at applying for work permits in general and having that authorization in Canada, there's some general criteria that we have to meet. So regardless of whatever stream of work permit you're applying for, even if you're applying for a study permit, you have to prove to immigration that you're going to leave Canada at the end of your stay. You have to show that you have enough funds to take care of yourself and also your family members. You have to have, no criminal record or criminal activity, not be a danger to Canada's security, be in good health, and have a medical exam if needed. From Barbados, this is not common. We don't usually see immigration requests Barbadians to get medical examinations. You must not be working for an employer that is blacklisted, and you must not plan to offer like striptease, erotic dances, escort services, etc. Those are in violation, and you have to basically comply and give immigration any documents that they're requesting. Now, as what we could gather from today's seminar is that there are only specific persons that could apply for a work permit from inside Canada. Excuse me 1 minute.
While Shontel is taking her sip of water, I just encourage you to type any questions that you have in the chat. Those who have not put their questions in yet, the questions that are already there that have not been answered as yet, we will obviously get to them first. But any other questions that you may have, please go ahead and type them in the chat because Shontel will be taking those questions shortly as we are wrapping up soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General. So as I was saying, some persons that could apply for work permits from inside Canada would be if you have a valid study permit or work permit already, if your spouse or common law partner has a valid study permit or work permit, and they're working in a specific type of job, if you're eligible for a post-graduation work permit, and then if you have like what we call a temporary resident permit. So also, if you're waiting on a decision on an application for permanent residence in Canada, you made a refugee claim, you're allowed to work in Canada without a work permit. All these situations constitute persons that could apply for work permits from inside Canada. So applying for work permit from inside Canada is only for these specific persons, and basically everybody else has to apply from outside Canada. So what is going to be interesting about our seminar tomorrow is that we'll be covering persons that could apply for work permits from outside Canada. So even if you're physically inside Canada, if your situation does not constitute one of these situations, one of these points, then you're looked at as outside Canada. And that is what we need to understand about the immigration system. We have inside Canada, meaning physically inside Canada and being in one of these type situations. And everybody else basically has to apply from outside. So even if you might have like a visitor status and you might be inside Canada, physically inside Canada, for immigration, they don't look at you as if you're inside Canada because you don't have a valid study or work permit. You're not eligible for the post-graduation work permit. You don't have a spouse, you're not waiting on a decision for permanent residence. So a lot of people inside Canada that can apply directly from inside Canada are persons that have ties within the Canadian labor market already. So persons that are already here in Canada and they're already settled. Okay. Now, in terms of job searching resources and tools, and we're going to be looking at these a little bit more tomorrow because they are linked to searching for jobs outside Canada as well as inside Canada. You could always look for jobs on Job Bank, Indeed Canada. Here are some popular ones. We have Workopolis, Monster Canada, eJobbo. And with respect to tips for searching for jobs in Canada, you don't want to rule out rural areas in Canada. So if you're in Canada as a student and then you're applying for the post-graduation work permit, is the open work permit is unrestricted. So there's nothing wrong with moving around, moving to a different province, seeing how that works for you. There's nothing wrong with enlisting professional help, right? Just remember that you should never be charged a fee, or an employer should not collect a fee in order for you to work in Canada or get employment in Canada. You could always apply for jobs. It's encouraged that you apply for jobs with a Canadian style resume, and we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. And you should research in-demand occupations in Canada to make sure that you are picking your courses and your programs in line with the demands in Canada. So here we have some in-demand occupations, but obviously right now the most in-demand occupation I would say would be registered nurses, but it varies from province to province. So these demands are all across Canada, but depending on the type of province you might want to migrate to, they might have a preference with respect to certain workers that they would want. So for example, in Ontario, we would want truck drivers. Nova Scotia might want physicians, might want registered nurses. It really varies from province to province, so it doesn't hurt to do your research when you're looking to come to Canada. Now, take-home tips for what we would have explored today. So you must always validate your information about immigrating to Canada through www.canada.ca, which is the government's website. Sometimes it could be incredibly difficult to navigate, but if you take your time and read through the information, you can have there's always good information on there. And also for the updates as well, if you find an article in Canada about working in Canada, chances are it might be outdated, it might not be legit, but on the government's website, which is www.canada.ca, it would be legit. Studying and working in Canada can lead to permanent residence, and studying in Canada is the best way to obtain that work authorization at this time. and conducting a rigorous research before you apply for schools in Canada, and making a solid plan for yourself and your family members before arriving in Canada. So I discourage persons from just arriving. Sometimes it's best to really plan and make sure that you put things in place, because it makes your process and transition a lot easier when you plan properly before coming, and make sure that you're always in Canada with authorization, as you know, not being in authorization could affect your visiting, your studying, or plans to migrate to Canada permanently. So you want to make sure that you're make sure that you have your status. Okay, and never shy away from getting, you know, professional consultation or professional advice on what would work for yourself and your family personally. So I'll leave the floor open for some questions at this time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Shontel. Okay, questions. Let's get back to our questions. Don't want to miss anybody, so I'm scrolling back, sorry. And let's see. Are your studies considered to have been completed once your study permit expires, or by the last day of class?
Neither. So your studies are considered completed once you have received your last grade on your transcript, or you have received a confirmation from the school in the form of a letter saying, congratulations, you have completed your degree, your certificate, your diploma on this date. So you either get it in the form of a letter from the school, or it goes by your transcript, whichever comes first, not by your study permit. So when you are granted a study permit, you usually have 3 months after that, after your studies. So for instance, if your studies are going to end in a particular month, usually immigration would give you 90 days, which is like 3 months on top of the end of your study permit. So you can't ever go by the end of your study permit. It has to be the end of your date that you got your final mark on your transcript, or the date that you got your confirmation from the school saying that you are finished your studies.
Okay, and somebody else is asking, can you apply for permanent residency while on a work permit?
You can apply for permanent residency on a work permit if you meet the criteria. So if you separately meet the criteria for permanent residence, like say if you're on a postgrad work permit, for example, and you're in order to apply for permanent residence, you need 1 year of working, and you're on a 3-year work permit, and you're still working and you have your 1 year, you could apply at the end of that 1 year, right? So yes, you can apply while you're working, but you must be meeting the eligibility for the permanent residence independently.
Okay, thanks, Keisha. So your answer, you got your answer. There are conditions, of course. There's another question. I have a diploma from Seneca College. How do I apply for my work permit outside of Canada?
Okay, so the person is that question is really broad. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that they're saying they have a diploma from Seneca College and they've left Canada, it seems now. So they're outside Canada. So they want to know how do they go about applying for the work permit now that they have finished their diploma. I know you spoke about that though, in terms of the 180 days and the different things. So yeah, that one is probably going to be a little difficult to answer, but I promise you, everybody here, I promise you that we have recorded this, as you can tell. So I will have it available that people can go back and check certain things that would have come up before. And a couple of people have asked for some information that we will post and we will email to you as well. So that question, Ricardo, hold that, because there was a lot of information on it earlier, and we will give you an opportunity to be able to go back to that when we post the recording. So the next question was, will this recording be accessible afterwards? Yes, it will be. And somebody else asked, do you generally have enough time to apply for the PGW after study in terms of your status and being allowed to stay in Canada awaiting a transcript?
Yes, you do. So for transcripts, usually for a lot of public institutions, it don't really take that long to get your transcripts or your confirmation that you're done, because the schools are usually really compliant and they know that you're applying for the post-graduation work permit. So it really does not take that long in order to get that particular documentation, right? So the person, so usually how it usually is, you know, for somebody's studies that was completely undisrupted, meaning that they came to Canada, they studied, and everything was in proportion, in a sense that they didn't miss courses or they didn't extend their stay or anything like that. For those type persons, they usually have a well length of time on their study permit. So as I said, like when your study permit is granted, they usually give you like a 2 months or 3 months extra on that study permit. And that is like some leg room in the event that you have any delays. So yes, when you're applying for that PGWP, you have enough time, and 180 days is a lot of time. Is a good 6 months. Yeah, you have a lot of time.
Okay, now somebody else is asking, in reference to the codes for the work skills, when working under the PGWP, should you be in a managerial position to be a code 0, or can that part of your work experience be from Barbados?
So for permanent residents, so I'll encourage that person to watch the lectures we had last year, because I think that is more a permanent resident type question, right? So for PGWP, you could take any job. You could take any job 0 to D. You could take any job at all. But the difference is that the job that you're going to need to be eligible for permanent residence. So if you're a person that if you have work experience and so on from Barbados already, and your work experience is 0 A or B, that work experience will be counted towards your PR. And then if you have work experience in Canada, in order to be eligible for PR inside Canada, you need that work experience to be skill level 0 A or B. The difference is that when you're inside Canada on a PGWP work permit, the stream that you're applying for permanent residence is going to be a little different. It's going to be your Canadian experience. It's called the Canadian experience class for permanent residence. So that is primarily the basis of that eligibility, is to have that work experience in Canada.
Okay, and just a couple more, I think. All right, somebody's asking for a list of the on-demand occupations. So we'll provide that for you as well. And somebody else is asking, actually, oh, I must say welcome to our High Commissioner. I just realized our High Commissioner, Glenn Clark, he joined us earlier. He has a question in here, and he's saying, he says he's really enjoying the seminar. And he says an applicant wants to know if their application was turned down this year, what time frame would they need to pass to reapply? And I'm assuming, High Commissioner, you're talking about a work permit application or a study permit application. I'm not sure. He didn't specify.
That is fine. I could answer generally to cover both.
Okay.
So your reapplying is going to depend on the reasons why you were refused in the first place. So for example, if you were refused on a for a study permit application, because, you know, they believe that you don't have enough funds, you know, to support your studies, then you would obviously have to get enough money. So I would say that when you have applied and you have been refused, what is going to be a determining factor in when you're going to reapply again is when you're able to address the problem that immigration has with that file, the reason why you got a refusal. So in that case, some people could reapply like a month after, and then some people could only reapply like a year after, depending on the reasonable time. So if you apply for a study permit and your bank account is like $500, and then you apply within a week and you have like 50,000, then it's going to be a red flag. So it depends on your situation and why you were refused.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another question. What about if you are in Canada already and you're a visitor, you're still within your 6 months, then what would be my next step?
That is for tomorrow.
Yes, okay. Bob, that's a question for tomorrow. You have to join us tomorrow, please. Somebody else is saying yes. Okay, so that's a work permit question. So Bob, tomorrow, that's the work permit.
Yeah, we'll be looking
that's the
at
other section. Yes.
So to answer Bob in short, he would need to, we're going to be looking at the LMIA that everybody's hearing about, because persons that in Canada or outside Canada would need that process, that LMIA process. So we're going to be looking at that tomorrow.
Right. Okay, Bob, because Shontel said to us earlier that if you are a visitor, it means that immigration looks at it as though you're applying from outside of Canada. So that's why, although you're saying you're here, that's why it will fall under tomorrow's heading. And okay, and then the High Commissioner also asked, a person called to say that they had a job offer, but immigration turned down their application. And what else can they do? And I think you probably answered that in your first part to just identify. Yeah, when you answered just now, I think that covered it when you said to identify what the issue was.
That too is going to be explored tomorrow, because some people that get job offers, sometimes I see things like an employer would just write a letter saying I'm offering the person a job, but in immigration, that is not the definition of a job offer. A job offer is specific, and we'll be discussing that tomorrow.
Okay, and somebody else wants to know how long does a work permit take? But I guess that is fairly subjective. You could.
It depends if you're applying from it. I mean, it depends. Right now, you have the person is asking before COVID or since COVID. It really depends, right? Outside Canada, inside Canada. If you're applying inside Canada, they're processing offices inside Canada. They take long. If you're applying outside, everything takes long, right? It depends. It really, really depends, and it varies from person to person.
Okay, our time is coming to a close, people, but I'll just try to get in a couple more questions. Shontel, please. And somebody's asking, who do you reach out to for professional advice on coming to Canada?
Me. Me. So
yes,
you could
we will let everybody know that Shontel is a consultant and she has her own practice, and she will share her contact information. She is just we have requested at the consulate, we have requested that she put on this seminar for us, or she present this seminar. We are hosting it, she's presenting, but Shontel is a private consultant with her own practice, and you can feel free to get her information and speak with her on a one-on-one after. But like I said, she's a consultant, she has her practice, so that would be a cost. Maybe you would have to speak with Shontel on that. This seminar for us is free, this bit of the information, but other than that, one-on-one with Shontel is a different story. So somebody else is saying thanks. Somebody else is saying, if you are given 1 year for a PGWP and you apply for PR, how can you extend your work permit while awaiting approval for PR?
Okay, so in terms of extending your work permit, waiting approval, you would need to make sure that when you apply for PR, you get your acknowledgement of receipt from immigration. So for some immigration programs, they work off of what we call a notification of interest, meaning that when you first start the process is not an actual application, it's just an interest, like express entry. So I don't know what program the person applied under, but for other programs, or at some stage when you're applying for permanent residence, you will get a formal acknowledgement from immigration that they have received and they have began processing your permanent resident application. At that time, when you get that confirmation from them, is when you could apply for your work permit to continue studying. So upon that acknowledgement from immigration is when you could apply.
Okay, and the very last question is, if you're studying in Barbados and your degree is almost finished, how can you apply for a work permit, and can you bring your children with you?
I think that's more for tomorrow, because if you're studying in Barbados and then you're applying for a work permit to come to Canada, is as if you're coming from outside, so you would need the cooperation of an employer, which we'll be talking about tomorrow.
Okay, wonderful. And that is the end of that's the end of the questions. Actually, we got through all of them, so wonderful. And I just want to take this opportunity Shontel, yes, if you could stop sharing your screen for just a
sorry.
moment. Thank you. That's all right. Thank you very much. Everybody, I just want to say, I want to thank Shontel, first of all, for her presentation today. And I just want to let you know, Shontel, that we are all eagerly awaiting tomorrow's presentation. Just like you said, a lot of people are checking to see what they can do when they're outside of Canada, what they do to come in, and how they apply. And I want to thank each and every one of you for participating today, for attending, for registering. Share the information with your friends and family who might be interested as well. And we're using this same link for tomorrow to log on tomorrow. So I am looking forward to seeing you. Thank you for your questions. And as I said before, Shontel is a consultant, and we will be sharing her contact information, of course, so that if anybody wants to speak with her one-on-one, you can feel free to do so. And yes, I think that's it. Thank you and have a wonderful night. Thanks to all those who helped, the committee and everybody else who helped. Let's see y'all tomorrow. Bye-bye.